The phrase, American live-action remake of an anime, has basically become universal shorthand for one of the greatest sins ever committed against cinema. It's honestly a miracle that Japan even still talks to the US after we took some of their most beloved animated properties, bludgeoned them to death, and then puppeteered their lifeless corpses to reenact plots so fetid and so loosely based on the original, you'd swear they were written in diarrhea instead of ink.
Let's pinch these turds off!
That might be a bit harsh, but there honestly might not be a single good live-action anime remake in all of Hollywood's history. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some good in them. And in this episode, we're taking a look at the bonkers, the embarrassing, the unbelievably American takes on Japanese animation, and the little things that, against all odds, they managed to get right. We're talking fleshing out one-note characters, capturing the spirit of the original show in big, brand new ways, and coming this close to actually having meaningful commentary about a serious societal problem plaguing America.
My brain hurts when I think too much.
This is CanonBall. Number 4, Speed Racer. There was a lot of confusion when the Wachowskis announced that their first post-Matrix return to directing was going to be Speed Racer, despite Neo's story still not being concluded. In an artificial computer world where anything is possible, how is it that we never saw Keanu Reeves ride into battle on a dragon made out of dynamite? Lana, Lily, the rights to Matrix Dragomite are still very much up for sale. Anyway, after writing and directing action movies about slow-mo bullets, followed by writing an action movie about slow-mo knives, it just seemed weird for the two directors to take on Speed Racer, a Japanese show from the 1960s about car racing that was like the opposite of slow-mo. I mean, it's got speed right there in the name. That was also the name of the main character because his parents hated him. The show actually introduced a whole generation of people to anime, while its 2008 live-action adaptation introduced people to hating American remakes of anime. The animated series was beautifully simple. Speed, who I guess was named after the substance his parents were on when they named him, is basically the human Sonic the Hedgehog, mostly blue and constantly wants to go fast. But the Wachowskis version introduced a bunch of weird and convoluted subplots about stock prices, market manipulation, and the business side of racing. Also, rather than a live-action film about real cars, Speed Racer more resembled a video game. Think Mario Kart's Rainbow Road if Mario hated people with epilepsy. But here's the thing about that. Go back and rewatch any part of the original Speed Racer anime, and you'll think there's something wrong with your Wi-Fi because of how choppy and slow it is. When you were a kid, the show might have looked like staring into the eyes of God as he told you that you were his favorite human, but the animation just doesn't hold up. It's like one step above flipbook quality.
Huh? Where am I? I don't remember a thing.
The live-action movie, on the other hand, attempts to recreate the feeling of traveling at breakneck velocities from the point of view of the goddamn Flash. That's why watching it feels like someone shooting off fireworks into your face at a warehouse rave. The movie wants you to feel what a professional racer feels. Razor-sharp focus that makes the colors of the world seem more vivid, while also blending them and everything outside your car into a chaos rainbow. The cars and the sets look unrealistic because you're seeing them through the eyes of people who are sexually stimulated by ships in Star Wars jumping into hyperspace.
Now their gloves are off and they're pounding one another.
So in the end, the Wachowskis might not have given us anything that looked like Speed Racer, but definitely something that resembled what they felt when watching the show. You can accuse the Speed Racer film of a lot of things, but not that it was half-assed. Even the biggest cynics can see that it came from a place of love, from people who were genuine fans of the source material. That's actually where all the business subplots start making a lot of sense. In the movie, Speed must ultimately forget about things like money and sponsorships, and do the big final race for the sheer love of the sport, the way he wants to do it. And that's basically how the Wachowskis approached making the movie, doing things their way, even if it meant totally flopping at the box office. Hell, the movie is basically a meta-documentary about the making of itself, in addition to being a love letter to the joy of creation, and of course recreating the feeling of drinking coffee, brewed with piping hot Red Bull and sweetened with amphetamines. It may not be what you wanted, but no other movie out there offers you something like that. Number 3, Dragon Ball Evolution. Dragon Ball is one of the most popular anime in the West, but no one's saying the series didn't require industrial-strength hooks powerful enough to raise the Titanic to suspend the audience's disbelief. Dragon Ball tells the story of Goku, a half-feral child with a monkey's tail, named after a god from a 16th century Chinese epic, who's actually an alien from a race of people all named after vegetables, and who pals around with a slug alien named after a flute whose dad he killed. I mean, he killed the slug alien's dad, not the flute's dad. Should go without saying, but we are talking about the same series that featured a gangster rabbit who turned people into carrots and ended up trapped on the moon after Goku used his magic extending stick to put him there. The anime made that work somehow. I suspect human sacrifices to some dark deities were involved.
Darkness! Explode!
But obviously, any live-action adaptation of Dragon Ball would need to change up a few things to make it palatable. 2009's Dragon Ball Evolution definitely got that memo, or specifically just the word change. In retrospect, it should have been obvious that the movie wasn't going to be faithful to the original when they couldn't even get the title right. Dragon Ball is supposed to be 2 words, you know, like screw you or eat shit. You know, the film's attitude towards fans of the franchise. The movie starred Justin Chatwin, the man with the whitest face and name in history, as Goku. Instead of a lovable hermit child, he was a horny high school student trying to get laid. Oh, and he's also snarky, which, let the record show, I'm pronouncing with triple quotation marks. The original Goku was an honest soul, as dumb as the rocks he chucked at trees for entertainment.
My favorite hobbies are reading and sports.
Chatwin's Goku, on the other hand, is channeling a bargain version of Spider-Man in his performance.
Well, my grandfather would say, beware of the Nimics.
Nimics?
Yeah, they're an alien race that nearly destroyed Earth over 2,000 years ago.
He turns the live-action Dragon Ball into a run-of-the-mill, Chosen One teen superhero movie, where the iconic Kamehameha attack was reduced to airbending. And while Chow Yun-fat as Master Roshi was a lot of fun,
I am Muten Roshi!
My grandfather is dead.
he wasn't enough to save a movie that didn't have the Dragon Balls to even attempt to make the original material work. Still, can we admit the original Dragon Ball also had its problems? Like Goku's wife, Chi-Chi? This isn't even about the fact that when the two first met, Chi-Chi was like 10 years old and running around in a bikini so skimpy it would make the producers of Toddlers and Tiaras blush. The bigger problem with the character is that she's more one-dimensional than Skylar White.
Gross! Look what I've done! I chopped his head right off!
When Chi-Chi grows up, she doesn't actually grow up. Her entire personality remains wanting to marry Goku, just like when she was a kid.
You promised to marry me!
That's why she trained herself in martial arts, so she could meet him at a tournament and ask why he never came back to marry her. At that point, she becomes your stock Tiger Mom character to Gohan and Goten. The live-action movie doesn't exactly break any new ground with their Chi-Chi, played by Jamie Chung, but it at least gives her a personality. She just really enjoys kicking ass. She doesn't have a tragic backstory. She doesn't fight to prove that women can fight too. She just likes the feeling of performing unlicensed dentistry and kidney massages with her feet. Her general philosophy is kick now, ask one question, and just continue kicking and punching. If that sounds familiar, it's because that's kind of the personality of the anime Goku. For whatever reason, the live-action film took his shtick and stuck it into Chi-Chi. This, of course, doesn't save the film from being the cinematic equivalent of your inner child getting beat up by a crazed man in a Leatherface-style Goku skin mask. Number 2. Ghost in the Shell. Speed Racer and Dragon Ball might have made whole generations of people into fans of anime, but it was Ghost in the Shell that made them smug about it. To this day, the 1995 cyberpunk film is often cited as one of the best, most highbrow examples of not just anime, but all of cinema, and it's not totally unwarranted. Ghost in the Shell deals with some heavy themes, like the nature of consciousness and sentience, the fundamental disconnect between mind and body in a cybernetic future, and the link between perception and reality. Many films since then have tackled similar subjects, but few have come up with anything as engrossing as the original Ghost in the Shell anime. According to many, that very much includes the 2017 Ghost in the Shell live-action adaptation. That film brought joy to countless people around the world by allowing them to joke about Scarlett Johansson being Asian. The protagonist of the original Ghost in the Shell anime is Major Motoko Kusanagi. He's the field leader of an anti-cybercrime law enforcement unit. In the American remake, that role is filled by Johansson's character, Major Mira Killian, only not really. By the end of the movie, it turns out that Killian actually used to be a Japanese woman named Motoko Kusanagi, whose brain and consciousness, or ghost, if you will, were transplanted into a fully cybernetic, decidedly Caucasian body, or shell.
I also have shoes and a face, so
This resulted in what some have deemed racial insensitivity, or even digital yellowface. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. The only thing that makes money on the internet today, besides porn, is outrage. Now, Jordan won't let me make porn, but he can't stop me from mispronouncing Japanese food names. The casting of Scarlett Johansson instead of an Asian actress naturally ticked off a ton of people.
And I'm an NYU film school graduate. You miserable, mediocre nothing, sucker!
But you know who wasn't among them? The anime film's director, Mamoru Oshii. In an interview with IGN, he said, quote, "The Major is a cyborg, and her physical form is an entirely assumed one. Her name and her current body are not her original name and body. So there is no basis for saying that an Asian actress must portray her."
Major Macho, why don't you stop trying to look female on the outside and switch over to a male chassis already?
True, this was only a small part of the 1995 anime film, whose themes were much more complex than the Hollywood remake. But the parts of the original story it did focus on were given proper attention. The American remake is probably best summarized by its water fight scene. As in, yeah, it wasn't super deep, but for what it tried to accomplish, it definitely put in the effort. For all its faults, the live-action film looks beautiful. It's like a more dystopian version of the world we live in, with its massive holographic billboards that make cities look like futuristic 3D Monopoly boards. The movie also fleshed out a few kick-ass characters, like Bateau, one of the Major's operatives with cybernetic eyes. In the anime, he does contribute to the plot, but we never really get to know what kind of person he is. In comparison, the live-action version, played by Pilu Asbeck, gets one or two scenes that humanize him. He loves stray dogs, for example. Again, not super deep, but it's more than the anime gave us. And before you start emailing or note tied to brick hurled through windowing me, let's clarify, the anime is still obviously the superior product. That being said, there are a few tiny areas where the live-action film got its message across a little bit better. I'm outside, that doesn't even make any sense. Number 1, Death Note. Good news, the 90s are back. Well, not in the form of somewhat affordable rent, or a world without Facebook. No such luck there. Unfortunately, the only way the 1990s are returning is in the form of twin movies.
How you doing?
A lot of you may not remember it, but for a while, we used to get back-to-back blockbusters with weirdly similar stories and themes. Armageddon and Deep Impact, Tombstone and Wyatt Earp, Ants and A Bug's Life. And yeah, I put the better movies first in each of those. It looks like we'll soon be getting 2 simultaneous live-action American takes on the popular manga and anime, Death Note. It's the story of the psychopathic Light Yagami using a magical notebook that kills people when you write their names in it. It's being adapted for Netflix by the Duffer Brothers, the guys behind Stranger Things, and as a sequel to the massively panned live-action Death Note film by Adam Wingard. The 2017 American take on Death Note is often described as the absolute worst anime adaptation ever made. The draw of the original Death Note was the genius Light trying to reshape the world in his own twisted image, while being caught in a psychological game of cat and mouse with L, the world's greatest detective. Through this, the manga and anime explored some thought-provoking questions about the idea of justice, all of which were apparently written down in the titular Death Note because they were all dead in the 2017 movie. In the American Death Note, Light Turner, played by Nat Wolff, is a sad, bullied loser whom the movie describes as bright but never actually shows it. He poses absolutely no threat to the film's L, played by Lakeith Stanfield, making his very presence in the movie kind of unnecessary. The film's biggest problem is that it can't quite bring itself to make Light a totally bad guy. He's the protagonist, so the film makes constant excuses for him killing criminals, hinting at how he's naive and misguided, but has a good heart. He's ultimately a victim of the show's real villains, Margaret Qualley's kill-happy Mia, who eggs him on, and Willem Dafoe's Ryuk, a god of death and the original owner of the Death Note. Obviously, that was all a huge, cowardly cop-out, but it's also what could have given the movie its own American identity. All the building blocks for making the American Death Note a good, or at least an interesting movie were all there. They were just put together in the shape of a giant middle finger, instead of a story about online radicalization. Nat Wolff's Light will seem very familiar to many American audiences. He's the kid who thinks that just because he's read a few books and gets bullied, that automatically makes him the good guy. He constantly mistakes his lack of power and unfulfillment for clarity of mind and purpose, telling himself that he's only killing people for the greater good. Sure, Light is radicalized by manipulative psychopaths, but he ultimately agrees with him, because deep down he's just a cruel, evil person. But that kind of portrayal never actually happens in the movie, and would admittedly need a lot of skillful writing to not become a carnival of poor taste. But if pulled off successfully, it would have made the American Death Note a truly American Death Note. Maybe the Duffer Brothers will pull that off. But if you want a live-action Death Note film that is precisely watchable, there are 4 Japanese live-action Death Notes for you to catch up on.
Stop crying. It won't do any good. And anyway, you have a lot of work to do.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of CanonBall. Jump in the comments and let us know which anime characters you'd like an unlicensed foot massage from.